Hi, everybody. Just getting ready for the Facebook Live starting in a few minutes. My name's Megan and I'm the Nutrition Babe. So we'll get going right at noon. I'm just going to give it a few minutes to have people tune in, get started, and get going. When you do jump on, as we're getting going and getting started here in a few minutes, if you want to let me know where you're tuning in from, if you can hear me okay, that would be awesome. I like to know who's listening in, make sure I can get some of your questions answered, make things relevant to you. So we have just a few minutes before we get going, but feel free to shout out, say hi, tell your friends to join if they aren't on here and you know that they'd be interested. The video will be saved and shared on the Build Up Dietitians page, and of course through all of my social media as well. So if you know anyone who wants to tune in and can't, feel free to let them know that they can access the video at another time. So we'll give it just another few minutes while we get everyone started and tuning in. You can grab your lunch or your coffee, depending on what time it is for you, or dinner. And we can get going in just a few minutes. Just to let everyone know, the Facebook Live video will last about 30 minutes, give or take, depending on how many questions we have. I have lots to talk about and lots to share, but definitely looking to get some insights and questions from you. So if you want to type any questions, let me know your thoughts. Feel free to do so. But we'll go for about half hour or so, get some of your questions answered, share my background and my passion and history. So I'm really excited to share all that information with you, let you know who I am, where I come from, why I'm doing all of this, some of the misconceptions and myths that I know that there are about health and nutrition, and start sharing some of that information, answer your questions. So hi, Leah. Excited to do this. All right. And so it's just about noon on my clock here, Eastern Standard Time. So we're going to get started officially. So hi, everybody who's tuning in. My name's Megan Racy, and I am also known as the Nutrition Babe on Facebook and Twitter. So you can find me on Facebook and Twitter at the Nutrition Babe. And on Instagram, I am Fork to Farm. All same messaging, same passion, and same reason why I'm doing this, but just slightly different audiences and different methods and ways to share the information. So I started this journey, this passion, through all of my degrees that I've done at university. So I've done all my degrees at a university in Canada in Southern Ontario, and that's still where I'm from and where I reside right now. So a lot of the information I do share is kind of more specific to Canadian agriculture and what goes on here in North America. But of course, I like to make it relevant to all my followers and everyone who tunes in. So I did all my degrees in human health and nutritional sciences. I had a passion to be a medical doctor and thought that was my path and career. And I focused really on the science side of health and nutrition when I started my undergraduate degrees. And then as I got into grad school and started my Master's of Science, that's when I kind of started to learn that science is really important and I love it. I have a passion for it and research, but what really matters to me is how people can use the research, who needs to hear about it, in what way, and how I can help people understand science and use it to make informed decisions and informed choices. So that started in my master's and continued on into my PhD, my doctorate work, where I was focusing on how to best communicate foods for health to youth and adolescents. And through that work, I worked really closely with community members and a really diverse team of researchers that included social science, and the more biological sciences and the human health, and really dipped my toes in a lot of different areas of science and understanding how people make changes in their behavior and understand science. And then I was really fortunate when I finished my doctorate degree. When I finished that, I got to be part of a startup company where I was working really closely with producers, agriculture organizations, food companies, consumer groups, so everyone from farm to fork. So it was a really interdisciplinary, cool research consulting group that I was really lucky to be part of and learn a lot more about how we produce our food in Canada, the struggles and challenges that farmers go through every day, as well as how that all relates back to health. So that kind of sparked, as people knew what I was doing, my friends and family, it started to spark some interest in people asking me, you know, should I be going for GMO free? Should I be going for cage free? You know, the sustainability of the agriculture sector, and trying to understand all the myths that go on and that are shared in the media, but also asking questions about what's best for them, for their human health, nutrition, making sure that they're feeding themselves and their families well, and supporting Canadian agriculture, saving money, and making sure that they're being good to the planet with climate change and things like that. So it's pretty big, broad topics, hard to answer. So that's kind of why I started the Nutrition Babe. It was a nod to the other babes out there, like the Farm Babe and the Food Science Babe, who were kind of almost trolling the three of us, and the other babes who are out there were kind of trolling the Food Babe, who is the exact opposite of what we're trying to do. So really, with this Nutrition Babe, just trying to share about consumer perceptions about health, nutrition, and how our agriculture sector influences our food production and what matters for how we're eating. I want to be a trusted source of information that's non-biased and evidence-based, that you know you can go to. I have a lot of friends and family who, when I share this information, they know that they can trust that I've done the research behind the science that I'm sharing or the articles. They know it's coming from a balanced perspective. And I also really want to share information so that you can be an informed consumer, an informed dietitian, an informed health professional, an informed researcher, so that we're helping consumers make informed choices. I don't want people falling for the advertisements, the media, the gimmicks. If you choose to buy a product, then that's fine. You can choose to eat how you like, because we're really fortunate in North America to have a diverse range of food products, food choices, a really big food sector. But that doesn't mean that you have to be forced into choosing one way or the other. You know, I have friends and family who worry about they've seen advertisements that organic food is better for their family and healthier and more nutritious. And so then they feel guilty if they can't afford organic food. And that's not fair, because the science doesn't show that organic food is necessarily more nutritious. There's lots of great options out there on both sides. So while the media and advertisements and headlines are catchy and they're sharing all this information, scientific literacy is hard. It's really hard to understand the science behind this. And it's really easy to get sucked into those one-liners and catchy headlines. So I want to be that trusted source of information where if there is those questions and concerns, I can be someone who can either get the answer because I know it, or can go find it, or can point you in the direction of someone to go get the answer. So as people are tuning in, that's a bit of a background about me and why I'm doing this and why I'm so passionate about it. I could talk forever just about that and myself, but that's not the point. I really want to be answering your questions. So Leah had a great question about how I handle trolls. Hi Matt, nice to meet you as well. So how do I handle trolls? Asking, you know, for everyone, if you're on social media, personally or professionally, you might deal with people who are just pushing their agenda, and by replying to them, sometimes you're giving them a platform to continue the discussion. So it's hard dealing with trolls because I'm so passionate about this. I think we all are. Anyone who's doing this sort of social media sharing of information, we're all passionate about what we do. So when someone is pushing back and not in a scientific way, or is being condescending or rude in their comments, it is hard to reply. It is hard to try and separate that professional, personal boundaries. So I do like to reply. People have differing opinions, and sometimes they don't mean to come across as abrupt as they are over their comments on social media. Especially with Twitter, you only have 280 characters, and so it can be really hard to communicate what you're thinking in that short of span. So it comes across kind of rude or abrupt and direct. So I do like to respond. I try and have a civil discourse with people if they do have questions and have differing opinions. But what I'm trying to learn to do is how to know when to cut it off, and know when I'm not trying to change people's opinions. If they are choosing vegan, vegetarian, omnivore, pescatarian, whatever diet style you're choosing, I'm not here to change that. I'm just sharing information about all types of diets and health and our agriculture sector. So it's not about changing what you're doing. And at a certain point, I have to just realize that they're going to have their opinions. And by continuing to respond, I'm just giving them that platform to be continuing to share their message, and on a space where that's not what I want to condone and encourage. So it is hard. If anyone else has any tips on how they deal with trolls or difficult comments, I'd love to hear it. I thought too I would talk a little bit about, as you guys are thinking of questions and typing in questions, I'd give a few misconceptions that I constantly hear in the nutrition space first. So a lot of it has to do with the way that studies are done in nutrition. So it's probably not surprising to you if you're in anything nutrition, health, dietetics, it's probably not surprising that nutrition science is really hard. All science is hard. Nutrition science and the sciences that are looking at human behavior and diet are especially hard. So a lot of the times we have to rely on observational studies to get an indication of how diets are influencing our health long term. So nutrition has been really effective and really good when it comes to specific nutrients and knowing how specific nutrients influence or impact a disease. So a common example is knowing about calcium for osteoporosis and bone health, knowing about vitamin C for scurvy. So we've been able to pinpoint what those nutrients are good for. But just because a nutrient is important for a certain function in our, if a nutrient is important for a certain function in our body, that's totally different than disease prediction or predicting if you have enough of certain nutrients. We know how much vitamin C you need to not have scurvy, but do we know how much vitamin C you need for more optimal human health, for longevity, for having really significant impacts on how long you're going to live or the health of your life, given all the factors that go on every day? So what you eat, your exercise, your genetics, where you live, your socioeconomic status, your income, like so many things affect our health. And that makes it really hard to then take what we know about nutrition and the nutrients and predict diseases. So I recently talked about the red meat, I'm going to call it scandal, controversy. So it was a really huge study that took years to do and included researchers across Canada and the States, I believe. And so they were saying that we don't need to change our red meat habits because the science about red meat and its impact on our health is weak. But we already knew that. we already knew that that's one of the struggles with health and nutrition science. So that wasn't all that surprising, and that doesn't necessarily mean that we don't have to change our behavior and our health or diet. So those sorts of, one-liners, one recommendation comes out of these studies, and then it's just misconstrued. And there's a lot of challenges with observational studies and a lot of noise that happens that makes it hard to know what really the impact of what we're eating is having on our health. And so then this also relates to things called relative risk and absolute risk. So absolute risk is your risk of developing a disease. So that could be something like you have a 2 in 20 risk of developing this disease by the time you're 60. And so that's what we know from the medical literature and data on people getting these diseases. So, you have a 2 in 20 risk of getting heart disease, let's say, by the time you're 60. So then they have, start looking at omega-3s for heart health, and then they say, okay, so omega-3s are a 50% reduction in getting that disease. So that's a relative risk, because they're going to compare people who don't have the disease to people who do, and trying to find out if omega-3s was that reason. But now that doesn't mean that everyone has a 50% reduction in getting that disease. What it actually means is that that risk of 2 in 20 now went down to 1 in 20. And so that's still important. It still could have implications for heart health and the importance of that, but the significance of it is different. And so a lot of times what you'll hear is the numbers referring to the relative risk. So you'll hear studies and articles saying 50% reduction in death or diabetes if you cut out carbs, if you do this diet. And that's just, it's not wrong, but it's not totally scientifically literate in what the science says. So that's some of the struggles between doing the research and interpreting the research in human health and nutrition, which makes it hard. And as well, like I was saying, we have a lot of research on the nutrients and their importance, but more and more and more research is coming out on whole foods and the importance of whole foods and the food matrix in our diet. So common examples are, we know that calcium is good for our bones, but also for muscle contraction. And they believe that it's also good for heart health, right? Because your heart's a muscle, it's contracting and firing all the time, 24/7. We need our heart. So they started to believe that people who would take calcium supplements would have better heart health, and they actually found the opposite was true, which seemed counterintuitive because people who consumed foods that were high in calcium, such as dairy products, had better heart health. So they were trying to figure out, is it because of the calcium or is it because of other things in the dairy products that are good for our heart? Or is it the combination of the way the food is all put together and the whole complex nutrients and the way they interact, and what is making the calcium in the food form better than the supplement form? So there's a lot of debate over those sorts of, can we tie it down to one nutrient when we're looking at nutrition and health and how it impacts our longevity, or is it that food? So it's becoming more and more important, and the research is showing this, that it really has to do with our whole diet. So I'm probably preaching to the choir because you guys know that, but those sorts of misconceptions are things that I hear often, especially so with my background in agriculture. Working with agriculture producers and farm groups and organizations, I also get questions related to how our food is produced. And sometimes people are asking questions just about food production, and sometimes they want to know if the way the food is produced makes a difference for its nutrition or has impacts on our health and disease risk reduction and things like that. So a common one has to do with organic and conventional. So organic production and conventional production, I don't even really like using that term, but that's kind of how we bucket them so that we can talk about them. So there isn't a lot of science that shows that organic is necessarily healthier for you or going to make you live longer. But it's nice to have choices and options to choose between organic and conventional foods. So you can choose whichever you like if that fits your budget, your lifestyle, your values, things like that. But I just start to have problems when I see, I've seen stores in Southern Ontario that use a Bristol board and write that organic food is better for you, for the environment, it's healthier, it uses no pesticides, and they have all these reasons that they've listed, when really, of course, the store wants you to buy organic, it's more expensive. So they're almost guilt tripping families into thinking they have to buy organic, and then that's when I have issues because organic does use pesticides. They're just a different type of pesticide. Organic costs more, but if that's the route you choose to go, or your farmer down the street grows organic and you want to support them, like by all means, go for it. We need multiple types of agriculture to support our growing population and to support the choice of consumers. So we can choose whichever we want, but it's those marketing and some of the misconceptions that go on that I have the issues with. And so I've done posts about organic and conventional food in terms of health. And then the Farm Babe she's constantly battling and having discussions about this. And so not that it's one or the other, but she talks about both and the benefits of both. GMOs, genetically modified organisms, is another question I constantly get about how those matter for our health. And so I won't necessarily discuss their production because Farm Babe can do that, or the science behind GMOs because the Food Science Babe does that. So I'll try not to go into that when I'm talking about these topics because I can point people in the right direction to get that information. But in terms of GMOs and our health, most GMOs that are available in Canada and the US, there's no difference in their nutritional value. So they're bred and produced so that we can grow corn in droughts or be resistant to pests, things like that. But there is some GMOs that are really important for developing countries. So golden rice is an example of a genetically modified rice that is really high in vitamin A, which is a huge issue for developing countries who are deficient in vitamin A. And vitamin A deficiency leads to night blindness, like issues with skin, eye health. So it has a lot of severe consequences. So for populations like that GMO is better for them and is healthier. But it's not available here in Canada or the US, and we're not growing it and we're not consuming it. So for us, that's where it differs. We don't have any difference in nutritional value in GMOs. However, by growing them, we're able to have food and have more food than we would if we didn't have those products. So Matt's just added a comment that the words like fresh, organic, natural, and local gives the customer the perception of you're getting better value. Would you say organic foods are safer than non-organic foods? So that's a tough one. So a lot of those words that you're mentioning there, Matt, like fresh, natural, local, are not regulated terms at all. So another issue I have in terms of nutrition and health relates to labeling and how marketers use labels to make indications to the food, whether it's the attributes of the food or how it was grown. And a lot of those terms are not regulated in Canada or the US, meaning they mean nothing. Like anyone could put natural on their product or fresh, but it doesn't mean that it's used different ingredients. There are some labels that are regulated. So organic is one of them that they do have to meet certain stipulations to use that on their brand on their label, on their product, or in marketing. So there has been some studies on the difference of food safety between organic and non-organic foods, in terms of like outbreaks and some of the bacteria outbreaks that can happen. So my issue about those food safety concerns is that can happen with any food, no matter how it's produced. We have a really safe food supply system in Canada and the US. We're really fortunate that way. When outbreaks happen, of course, we all hear about it because it's a big deal. Everyone needs to hear about it. We all need to, if there's a recall on lettuce, we need to get rid of our lettuce. But outbreaks are far and few between, and they've happened with both types of products. In terms of safety for pesticide residues, let's say, or like other concerns in the growing practices, there's a common list that gets shared by an environmental group called the Dirty Dozen. And so it talks about the fruits and vegetables that have the most pesticide residues on them. And it kind of gives the indication that you should be buying organic because they have less pesticide residues on them. But in reality, the residues are so small and well below the limits that governments have set as safety and what is acceptable in our food supply. So both organic and conventional or non-organic foods use pesticides. They're just different pesticides, and sometimes the organic pesticides don't last as long on the fruits or vegetables, or they're able to not use any pesticides, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the food is safer because the consumption of pesticides hasn't been linked to any cancers or diseases in humans, especially at the levels that are left on our foods. And hopefully, if we're all having good food safety practices, you're washing your fruits and vegetables when you're bringing them home. So not only for pesticide residues, but also because the amount of people that have touched your pepper before you touched it and picked it up and brought it home. So we should all be washing our fruits and vegetables anyways, so then the pesticide residues really shouldn't matter. And they especially shouldn't matter on foods like bananas, melons, where you don't eat the peel anyways. So even if they are sprayed with pesticides, you're not eating the outside. So that's an example of where the marketing and the scare tactics have been used to scare people one way or the other, and it's not based on science, but it works. Marketing works. That's why they're successful. So I would say some of those questions about, GMOs, organic, conventional production. I also get a lot of questions about animal welfare practices or cage-free, antibiotic use, things like that. So I do posts about the impact that those have on the food and whether it makes a difference for the nutritional value. And then I also like to tie it back to what the Canadian producers and producers in the States are doing. And sometimes you have to read the fine print. So I'm also really passionate about trying to share information on labeling and how, which labels to look for, which labels are kind of bogus, and which labels mean something and have meaning behind them, and which ones you need to read the fine print for. So, for example, in Canada, you can't use growth hormones in beef. That's going to be for human consumption. But you'll see sometimes certain retailers have their free from brands, and so then it'll say that it's free from growth hormones. Well, that's just like all beef in Canada. So they'll have a fine print that says that, but as a consumer, you might not see that. So those kind of questions are important, and I like to try and answer those. Another great question that just came in is about websites and social media platforms that I like and trust and recommend for US and Canadian dietitians. So there's lots. So hopefully you're on both Facebook and Twitter, and probably Instagram. But in terms of getting some science-based, really useful information, I like to go on Facebook and Twitter mostly for those, especially Twitter, and the conversations that happen on there are, even with the short characters, they're really great. So if you're looking for anything related to the impact of farming and the environment, there's a researcher in the States, and his handle on Twitter is GHG Guru. So he's one I would definitely recommend following if you're interested in anything related to sustainability, environmental impact. Of course, there's the Farm Babe and the Food Science Babe. As well, Tim Caulfield, he's written a few books, and he's really made it his life's mission. He does a lot of other things, but one of his life's missions is to debunk Goop and everything that Gwyneth Paltrow and the celebrities share. So I've heard him speak. He's a really engaging speaker, and shares evidence-based information. So I would definitely follow him. And then as well, in Canada and the US, there's the Center for Food Integrity. And they also have a side part of their mission is best food facts. So that's where consumers will ask questions and they'll find experts to answer those questions, and then they share them like an FAQ. So they're great. They have a Canadian site and a US site. So you can get either, and you can sign up for their newsletter to get best food fact newsletters. And then another one, so Joe Schwartz, he's a Canadian researcher at McGill, and they have the McGill Office for Science and Society. So he's, again, another great myth buster. He was just on the talk show last week, I believe it was, and they have a newsletter. They myth bust, and he's, again, really fun and engaging. I've heard him speak, so I would definitely recommend listening to him, and picking up his book. He has a new book coming out just came out called A Grain of Salt. So those are kind of some of the key important people and places that I like to follow and try and get on their newsletters. I'll post all of that in the comments on this video so that you can see it, and I'll link right to their sites if I think of any others. But as we're just finishing up in the last minute, I just wanted to also reiterate where you can follow me and ask me questions directly and see what I'm sharing. So you can find me on Facebook and Twitter at The Nutrition Babe, and you can find me on Instagram at Fork to Farm. So if you have any other questions, I'd be happy to answer them after the live video and reply in the comments. And hopefully you'll follow and share what I'm doing so that other people can follow along, and we can have together myth busting and breaking down those barriers and misconceptions about health and nutrition and how our production of food impacts that. So thanks so much for tuning in and listening along. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you have any other recommendations, I'd love to hear them. So hopefully we'll chat on social media and you guys enjoyed. So thanks again so much for the opportunity and for listening, and we'll talk to you later. Thanks.